She was pregnant, barefoot, standing in the middle of a storm, and the man she called husband had just thrown her out of his life in front of the whole world. No one believed her. No one stopped. Until a black armored SUV pulled up on the side of the road, and the man who stepped out was the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast of America, a man who had never shown mercy. But that night, he refused to leave. If you want to know what happens next, watch until the end, hit like, and comment the name of the city you're watching in, so I know how far this story has come. The storm hit Harbor City like a grudge, not the kind that builds slow and gives warning. This one dropped out of a black sky at 7:43 in the evening and split the air with a crack that shook window frames in their casings. Rain came sideways, dense as gravel, flooding the gutters along Edgemont Drive within minutes. The mansions up on the ridge, those limestone monuments to old money and new fraud, stood like pale teeth against the dark, their garden lights flickering, their iron gates streaming with water. Inside the largest of them, the Hale estate, 28-year-old Vivian Cross was trying to remember how to breathe. She stood in the foyer with her shoes off because she'd kicked them somewhere near the staircase when Damien started yelling. Her feet were cold on the marble. Her hands were shaking. Not the delicate kind of shaking people talk about in stories. Real shaking, the kind where your fingers won't close and your jaw locks, and you can feel your own heartbeat in your teeth. Damien Hale stood 6 feet away with his phone in one hand and a whiskey glass in the other, and he hadn't looked at her face in over an hour. He was talking to someone, his lawyer, his publicist, she couldn't tell anymore, and every third word out of his mouth was her name. Vivian. Vivian did this. Vivian signed off on those transfers. Vivian has been lying to everyone. She opened her mouth to speak and nothing came out. There were other people in the room. She counted them without turning her head. Damien's brother, Trent, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and a look on his face like he was watching a car wreck he'd been expecting. The family attorney, Mercer, standing near the windows with a tablet in his hands, and his lips pressed into a line so thin they'd disappeared. 2 security guards she didn't recognize. And behind them, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass of the front door, a cluster of people with cameras. Reporters. They were already here. Damien finally looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from crying. Damien didn't cry. From rage. From 3 days of conference calls and forensic accountants and numbers that kept pointing in her direction. And from the particular brand of fury that only comes when a man realizes his empire might be smaller than he thought. 17 million. His voice was flat, controlled, worse than shouting. $17 million moved through shell accounts in the Caymans, and your digital signature is on every single transfer. That's not possible, Vivian said. Her voice cracked on the second word. Mercer. The attorney stepped forward, tapped the tablet twice. Held it up so she could see the screen. Rows of numbers, account names she didn't recognize. And there, again and again, her signature. Her employee ID, her access credentials. These were pulled directly from the company's secure servers, Mercer said. His tone was the careful, rehearsed kind that lawyers use when they've already decided who's guilty. Every transaction traces back to your authorization codes. There's also the matter of the hotel records. Vivian's stomach dropped. What hotel records? The alcove downtown. Damien took a step toward her. Room 1412. Booked 14 times in the past 3 months under a name linked to your personal credit card. Always the same room. Always midday. He paused. Let the silence do the work. Who is he, Vivian? There is no he. I've never been to that hotel. Don't. Damien, I swear to you, I said don't. He hurled the whiskey glass. It didn't hit her. It hit the wall 2 feet to her left and shattered into a spray of crystal and amber liquid that spattered her arm. She flinched so hard she stumbled backward and hit the banister. Nobody moved to help her. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. She could hear rain hammering the roof. She could hear her own pulse. And underneath it all, the faint click-click-click of cameras from outside. Trent cleared his throat. Damien, the press is already at the gate. You need to make a statement, or they're going to run whatever story they want. Damien nodded. He set his phone on the hall table, straightened his tie. And then he did something that would play on every screen in Harbor City within the hour. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside into the rain with his shoulders squared like a man about to deliver a verdict. Vivian watched from inside. Through the half-open door, she could see the cameras, the microphone booms, the wet faces of reporters shouting questions over the thunder. Damien raised one hand. They quieted. "My wife has been removed from all positions within Hale Capital, effective immediately," he said. His voice carried. He'd always been good at that, filling a room, filling a crowd, making people believe him. Forensic evidence indicates she orchestrated the unauthorized transfer of approximately $17 million from the firm's operating accounts. Additionally, we have reason to believe she has been engaged in a prolonged personal relationship outside our marriage. I want to be clear. I am cooperating fully with authorities. I love my wife. I trusted her. That trust was betrayed. Vivian didn't hear the rest. She was on her knees on the marble floor, and the only sound in the world was a ringing in her ears and the dull, nauseating cramp low in her abdomen that reminded her of the things she hadn't told anyone. 8 weeks pregnant. She pressed her palm flat against her stomach and closed her eyes. She hadn't told him. She'd been waiting for the right moment, some quiet evening, maybe after dinner, when the tension between them had eased enough to let something hopeful in. But there had been no quiet evenings. There had been no easing. There had been only Damien's growing paranoia, the late-night calls, the locked office doors, and the slow, deliberate dismantling of everything she thought she knew about her own life. The security guards came for her 12 minutes later. They weren't rough. They didn't have to be. They simply took her by each arm and walked her through the foyer, past the shattered glass no one had cleaned up, past the family portraits on the wall where her face smiled next to Damien's like some relic from another century, and out through the front door into the storm. The cameras erupted. Flashbulbs. Shouted questions. Someone screamed her name. She stumbled on the wet marble steps, barefoot, no jacket, her dress soaking through in seconds, and one of the guards caught her elbow just long enough to keep her upright before letting go. She stood on the driveway in the rain and watched the front door close behind her. That was it. 3 years of marriage. 2 years before that of dating, of dinners with his family, of learning the names of his business partners and sitting through board meetings and standing beside him at charity galas with her hand on his arm and a smile she'd practiced in the mirror until it stopped looking desperate. All of it, reduced to a locked door and a driveway full of strangers. She walked. She didn't know where. Away from the cameras, past the iron gate that the guards had opened just wide enough to let her through, down the long curve of Edgemont Drive where the mansions gave way to hedgerows, and the hedgerows gave way to nothing. The rain didn't let up. Her dress clung to her like a second skin. Her feet bled on the asphalt. She could feel the blood, warm against the cold rain. And she kept walking because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant falling apart. And she couldn't fall apart. Not yet. Not with this thing growing inside her that didn't know yet how broken the world was. Her phone was dead. She'd left her purse inside. She had nothing. No money, no ID, no way to call anyone. And it occurred to her, with a clarity that felt almost gentle, that there was no one to call anyway. Her parents were gone. Her sister hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since Vivian married into money, and the distance between them filled up with resentment and silence. Her friends were Damien's friends, which meant they were Damien's employees, which meant they were already drafting statements of their own. She reached the highway interchange 40 minutes later. Cars passed in the rain, their headlights cutting through the dark, their tires hissing on the wet road. She stood on the shoulder and raised one hand, thumb out, the universal gesture. Nobody stopped. A sedan slowed, then accelerated. A truck blared its horn. A minivan swerved around her like she was debris. Her legs buckled at the 53-minute mark. She went down on one knee first, then both, then sideways onto the gravel. The rain was warm now. Or she was too cold to tell the difference. The cramp in her abdomen had become a steady ache, and she pressed both hands against her stomach and curled into herself and thought, "Not now, please, not now." Headlights swept across her. A vehicle pulled to the shoulder, engine idling, wipers slapping. She heard a door open and close. Footsteps on wet gravel, heavy and deliberate. A man crouched beside her. She couldn't see his face, just a dark silhouette against the headlights, rain streaming off broad shoulders. He smelled like leather and cigarette smoke and something metallic like gun oil. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was low, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had never been ignored. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're on the side of a highway in a thunderstorm with no shoes and blood on your feet." A pause. "Can you stand?" "I don't know you." "No, you don't." He didn't move, didn't reach for her, just stayed there, crouched on the gravel with rain running down his face, and waited. Vivian opened her eyes, forced them to focus. The man was maybe 35, dark hair cut short, jaw like a brick, a scar running from the corner of his left eye down to the hinge of his jaw. He wore a black coat over a black shirt, no tie. Behind him, the SUV sat on the shoulder. An armored Suburban, the kind with reinforced doors and bulletproof glass. The kind of vehicle that doesn't belong to investment bankers or corporate attorneys. The kind that belongs to people who expect to be shot at. "Who are you?" she asked. The man stood, held out his hand. "Someone who's not going to leave you here." She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, and he pulled her up like she weighed nothing and steadied her with one hand on her shoulder while the rain hammered down around them. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what happened. He just opened the rear door of the SUV and waited for her to get in. She hesitated. Every instinct she had said no. Don't get in a stranger's car, don't trust anyone, don't let yourself be vulnerable again. But her feet were bleeding and her baby was inside her, and the world had just proven, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that the people she trusted were more dangerous than any stranger. She got in. The interior was warm, dark leather seats, a console screen showing a GPS map. In the front passenger seat, another man sat with his hands folded, older, heavy-set, with a shaved head and a holstered pistol visible under his jacket. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror but said nothing. The driver got in, pulled the door shut. The sound of the storm dropped to a muffled roar. "Luca," the driver said. The heavy-set man looked at him. "Call Renata. Tell her we're bringing someone to the compound. She'll need a doctor." "Nico." "Now." The heavy-set man, Luca, picked up a phone and made the call. Nico Valenti pulled the SUV onto the highway and drove. Vivian watched the city lights blur past through the rain-streaked window. She didn't ask where they were going. She was too exhausted, too hollowed out, too aware of the ache in her body and the absence of everything she'd believed was real. Somewhere around mile marker 47, she fell asleep. She woke up in a bed she didn't recognize. White sheets, a window showing a gray dawn sky over a pine forest. The smell of antiseptic. A woman with short silver hair and reading glasses sat in a chair beside the bed, checking an IV line taped to the back of Vivian's left hand. Vivian jerked upright. "Easy." The woman pressed a hand against her shoulder. Firm, not unkind. "You're dehydrated, and you've got lacerations on both feet. Nothing life-threatening." "Where am I?" "You're safe. That's what matters right now." That's not an answer. The woman, Renata, Vivian guessed, adjusted the IV drip without looking at her. "You're at a private estate about 90 minutes outside Harbor City. Nico brought you in last night. You were unconscious by the time you got here." "Nico Valenti." Renata nodded. The name landed in Vivian's chest like a stone. Nico Valenti. She'd heard the name before. Everyone in Harbor City had. He was a ghost story that businessmen told in low voices at cocktail parties. The head of the Valenti organization. Smuggling. Protection rackets. Territorial control over every dock and warehouse from Harbor City to Belmont. A man who had reportedly ordered the disappearance of 3 rival bosses in a single weekend and never been charged. And he'd picked her up off the side of a highway like a stray dog. "I need to leave," Vivian said. "You need to rest." "You don't understand. I can't be here. If anyone finds out I'm here, nobody knows you're here. This compound doesn't exist on any map, and the staff have been with Nico for years. You're safer in this room than you've been in months." Renata paused, looked at her over the reading glasses. "The doctor confirmed something else last night. You're pregnant, about 8 weeks." Vivian felt the air leave her lungs. I know. Does the father know? The father threw me out of his house last night. Renata said nothing for a long time. Then she stood, folded her reading glasses, and tucked them into her breast pocket. Breakfast is in 20 minutes. Down the hall, turn left, through the double doors. You'll eat whether you want to or not. She left. Vivian sat in the bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to assemble the facts of her own life into something that made sense. 12 hours ago, she was the wife of one of the most powerful investment executives in Harbor City. She had a home, a reputation, a name that meant something. Now she was barefoot in a mob boss's compound with an IV in her hand and her face on every news feed in the country. She got up, found clothes folded on a chair near the door, a plain cotton shirt, black pants, soft-soled shoes that someone had guessed her size for. She dressed slowly, her feet stung. Her hands were still shaking. The compound was bigger than she'd expected. Stone walls, hardwood floors, hallways lined with security cameras, and steel-reinforced doors. Men in dark clothing moved through the corridors with purpose, not frantic, not aggressive, just controlled, like soldiers between deployments. She found the dining room through the double doors, a long table, coffee, bread, eggs, fruit, and at the far end, Nico Valenti, sitting alone with a newspaper and a cup of black coffee. He looked up when she entered, didn't smile, didn't stand, just watched her with eyes that were dark and flat and gave nothing away. Vivian sat 3 chairs away from him, poured herself coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Eat, he said. I'm not hungry. You're pregnant and you haven't eaten in over 12 hours. Eat. She took a piece of bread, bit into it. It tasted like dust. You know who I am, she said. Yes. Then you know what they're saying about me. I know what they're saying. I don't know if it's true. It's not true. He folded the newspaper, set it aside, looked at her the way a man looks at a broken machine he's deciding whether to fix or discard. $17 million doesn't disappear by accident. Someone moved that money. If it wasn't you, then someone went to a great deal of trouble to make it look like you. Why do you care? I don't. Then why am I here? Nico leaned back in his chair. The scar on his face caught the morning light. Because I drove past a woman bleeding on the side of a road in a storm, and I'm not the kind of man who drives past. You're a criminal. Yes. People say you've killed. People say a lot of things. His voice didn't change, didn't rise, didn't harden. You're welcome to leave any time. The gate's not locked. But if you walk out that door, you walk out with nothing. No money, no phone, no contacts, and a face every reporter in the state is looking for. You'll last 6 hours, maybe less. Vivian set the bread down. Her throat was tight. What do you want from me? Nothing. Nobody does nothing for free. For the first time, something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth, not kindness, but something raw and unnameable. Something that looked like recognition. Maybe I know what it's like to have the whole world decide what you are before you get a chance to speak. The silence between them stretched. Outside, rain continued to fall against the windows, softer now, like the storm was thinking about moving on. Then Nico stood. He picked up his coffee. Luca will get you whatever you need. Stay as long as you want. He walked toward the door, then stopped without turning around. One thing. The transfers, the shell accounts in the Caymans. My people ran a preliminary trace last night. The routing codes don't match any standard investment protocols. They match something else. Vivian's pulse spiked. Match what? Nico turned his head just enough to catch her in his peripheral vision. A network we've been watching for almost 2 years. A network run by someone inside Hale Capital. Someone who isn't you. He walked out. Vivian sat alone at the table. The coffee was getting cold. The bread was untouched. The rain tapped against the glass. And somewhere in Harbor City, on the 47th floor of the Hale Capital Tower, a man named Gideon Voss was picking up his phone, dialing a number with a blocked caller ID, and saying 4 words that would change everything. She's still alive. Fix it. The call came through at 6:41 in the morning. Luca took it in the hallway outside the communications room, one hand pressed flat against the stone wall, his face doing the thing it did when the news was bad, going completely still, like a man bracing for impact. He listened for 90 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Hold," walked to the dining room door, and knocked twice. Nico was already putting on his jacket. "Voss's people ran a sweep of the highway last night," Luca said. "Cameras at the interchange. They got a partial plate." Nico buttoned the bottom button. "How partial?" "Enough." The two men looked at each other across the doorframe. Behind them, down the corridor, the sound of a door opening. Vivian, moving toward the bathroom, her footsteps slow and careful on the hardwood. "She stays inside the compound," Nico said. "All perimeter shifts double. Nobody comes through the east gate without my sign-off." "Nico, if they trace the plate, they already know this address? Then we move faster than they do." He picked up his coffee, finished it standing, set the cup down on the hall table with a quiet precision that was more unsettling than any raised voice. "Get Marco on the financial trace. I want everything on those Cayman accounts by noon, and get me a line to Ferretti at the Federal Building, the one who owes us from the Northgate situation." Luca nodded, started to turn away. "And Luca," he stopped. "Nobody tells her any of this?" "Not yet." Luca's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He just walked. Vivian spent the morning in the room they'd given her, sitting cross-legged on the bed with her back against the headboard and a legal pad someone had left on the nightstand. She was writing, not a journal, not a letter, just names. Every name she could remember from the past 3 years. Business partners of Damien's, attorneys, board members, people who'd been in meetings she wasn't supposed to attend, people who'd looked at her a half second too long, people who'd gone quiet when she walked into a room. Gideon Voss appeared on the list twice. Once near the top, then again at the bottom with a circle around it. She'd met him 18 times. She'd counted, sitting there with the rain still coming down outside, and nothing else to do but inventory her own life. 18 meetings, 6 formal dinners, 2 charity events, 1 weekend in the Hamptons where he'd spent most of Saturday watching her from across the garden with a glass of wine in his hand and a smile that never reached his eyes. He was 3 years older than Damien, quieter, better dressed. The kind of man who says very little in a room and makes you aware of every word you've said. She'd told Damien once, early on, that something about Gideon made her uncomfortable. Damien had laughed, called her intuitive, then forgotten the conversation. She should have pushed harder. She heard footsteps in the hall, heavier than Renata's. She put the legal pad face down on the mattress. The door opened without a knock. A man she hadn't seen before stood in the frame, mid-40s, lean, with a narrow face and eyes that moved too fast, cataloging everything in the room before settling on her. He wore a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and held a laptop against his hip like it was an extension of his arm. "You're the wife," he said. Ex-wife, apparently. "Marco." He didn't offer his hand. Walked to the small desk near the window, set the laptop down, opened it. "Nico wants you to look at something." She got off the bed, crossed to the desk. The screen showed a spreadsheet, rows and columns of account numbers, transaction dates, transfer amounts. She recognized the structure immediately. She'd spent 2 years auditing Hale Capital's subsidiary reports. She knew what legitimate internal transfers looked like. These weren't legitimate. "These routing numbers," she said. She leaned closer. Her finger traced a column without touching the screen. "They're formatted to look like domestic transfers. But the identifier codes in the 3rd column, these aren't American bank codes. These are front sequences. Somebody built a relay system." Marco looked at her sideways. "Go on." "The money didn't go to the Caymans first. It was routed through a shell layer, probably 3, maybe 4 companies, before it landed offshore. That means there's a paper trail somewhere in the middle, a real one, not a fabricated one." She straightened, pressed her fingers against the back of the desk chair. "You already know this." "I wanted to see if you did." "So this was a test. Everything is a test." Marco closed the laptop. "You have a background in forensic accounting?" 2 years with an auditing firm before Damien, 3 years running internal compliance at Hale Capital before he moved me to a figurehead position so I'd stop finding things. She said it flat, without bitterness. Just fact. I found discrepancies 18 months ago, small ones. I flagged them internally and was told the accounts had already been reviewed. By who? She met his eyes. Gideon Voss? Marco was quiet for 3 seconds, long enough to be deliberate. You flagged discrepancies to the man who was running the operation. I didn't know that then. No, you didn't. He picked up the laptop, moved toward the door. Stay in the compound. Don't use the Wi-Fi for anything personal. Don't call anyone. I don't have a phone. Good. He paused in the door frame. For what it's worth, whoever built this frame-up spent a long time doing it. The access codes they used, the credential spoofing, the hotel records. It's not the work of someone who decided to destroy you 3 weeks ago. This started at least a year back. He said it without softening it, just laid it out like weather data. Somebody's been planning to erase you for a very long time. He left. Vivian stood at the desk and looked at the place where the laptop had been. Her stomach turned, not from nausea, from the particular cold clarity that comes when the scope of a thing finally becomes visible. A year. Someone had spent a year building a cage around her life, bolt by bolt, and she'd walked through it every single day without seeing the bars. She picked up the legal pad, circled Gideon's name a 3rd time, then wrote a single word underneath it, why. She didn't go to lunch. Renata brought a tray to her room without being asked, soup, crackers, a cup of tea, and set it on the nightstand with a look that discouraged argument. Vivian ate mechanically, standing at the window watching the pines move in the wind. The rain had stopped. The sky was the color of an old bruise. At 2 in the afternoon she heard shouting, not from outside, from somewhere deeper in the compound behind a set of doors she'd been told were off limits. Male voices overlapping. One of them Nico's, low and controlled even in anger, the other louder, less disciplined. She moved to her door, opened it a crack. The hallway was empty, but the voices carried. Already had 3 men on the north side of the interchange, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning until this morning. I didn't have confirmation. You don't bring me probabilities, Dante. You bring me facts or you don't open your mouth. A pause. Heavy. Who authorized the secondary sweep? Voss's security chief, Carver. He's former federal. I know who Carver is. Nico's voice dropped even lower. She had to strain to catch it. How many vehicles? 2 seen. Could be more. They're not here for reconnaissance. They found the plate. They ran the owner. They know the compound is connected to us. They're positioning. Another pause. Get everyone in from the outer perimeter. Pull them inside the wall. You're giving up the outer ground. I'm consolidating. There's a difference. Now move. The sound of a door opening and closing. Then footsteps. Rapid, organized, the compound shifting into a different gear. Through her window, she saw 2 men in dark gear jog across the gravel yard toward the east wall. One of them carried a rifle across his chest. Her mouth went dry. She stepped back from the door, sat on the edge of the bed. The baby was a weight inside her that she kept forgetting and then remembering in a rush that felt like vertigo. 8 weeks. Not even visible yet. Not even fully real in the way that things are real when you can see and touch and prove them. And yet she kept pressing her palm flat against her abdomen, as if the warmth of her own hand was something she could transfer. The door opened without a knock again. This time it was Nico. He stood in the frame and looked at her and said, "You heard." It wasn't a question. "Some of it," she said. He came into the room, left the door open, stood near the window with his arms at his sides and looked out at the yard for a moment, as if he needed to account for everything out there before he could deal with what was in here. "Someone is tracking you," he said. "Competent people. Ex-federal, private contracted, the kind Voss can afford." He turned from the window. "They'll have this location by tonight at the latest. Then I should leave." "Where?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "You have no money, no ID, no vehicle, and your face is the most recognizable thing in Harbor City right now. You walk out of here and you're found within the hour." He said it without cruelty, without any particular emotion, just geometry. "I'm moving you to a secondary location at sundown, more secure, harder approach." "You're doing an awful lot for someone who doesn't care." Something shifted in his jaw, tightened. I told you this morning. You told me you don't want anything. That's not the same as not caring. She stood up. She was angry, suddenly, not at him, or not entirely at him, but at the whole machinery of it, the way she kept ending up in rooms that other people controlled. I want to understand what's happening, not the edited version, not what you decide I can handle, all of it. Nico looked at her for a long moment, the scar on his face, the flat dark eyes, the stillness that he carried like armor. She didn't look away. She was past the point of being intimidated by powerful men. She'd been married to one. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He pulled the desk chair out and sat across from her, forearms on his knees. No performance, no distance, just two people in a room with the same problem. Gideon Voss has been moving money through a layered shell network for at least 2 years, he said. My people came across the first edge of it 8 months ago, a payment routing that overlapped with a dock we use in the South Harbor. Small enough to be accidental. We kept watching. He paused. 2 months ago, the volume increased, significantly, and the routing changed. The new channels ran through Hale Capital's internal processing system. Someone inside the firm with high-level access was facilitating it. Using my credentials, Vivian said. We didn't know that then. We do now. He laced his fingers together. What we also know, and this is what Marco hasn't told you yet, is that 6 weeks ago, a Hale Capital compliance auditor named Peter Shen filed an internal report flagging anomalies in the same accounts. He was told the issue had been reviewed. He stopped, looked at her. 3 weeks ago, Peter Shen died in a car accident on Route 9. Single vehicle, no witnesses, no camera coverage. The room was very quiet. He wasn't the first, Nico said. A forensic accountant named Sylvia Darce died of an overdose in February. She'd been contracted by an outside firm to review Hale Capital's subsidiary structure. Before her, a data analyst named Reeves, former Hale Capital employee, disappeared last November. His car was found at the train station. He wasn't on any train. Vivian counted them in her head. 3 people. 3 people who'd gotten close to the same thread she'd pulled on 18 months ago and been told to drop. He's been killing them, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. He's been eliminating them. There's a distinction he'd probably insist on. Nico's tone was dry, not amused, just precise. The point is, you didn't just get framed. You were chosen, deliberately. Months before any of this went public, Voss identified you as the most useful liability. Someone with enough genuine access to be credible. Someone whose relationship with Damien was complicated enough to make the personal betrayal story land. Because Damien would believe it. Because Damien is easy to lead when someone speaks to his pride. He said it without hesitation, no cushion. He's not the architect here. He's not even the structure. He's a feature of the plan. Vivian thought about Damien on the front steps last night, his voice carrying over the storm, his face arranged into controlled devastation. How polished it was. How ready. Like a man who'd been given his lines in advance. Does he know? She asked. Does Damien know what Gideon actually is? I don't think he knows about the deaths, but I think he suspected the accounts were manipulated and chose not to ask the right questions. Nico watched her take that in. There's a difference between being fooled and being willfully blind. She felt that in her sternum, like a key turning. There's something else, Nico said. He was watching her carefully now. The evidence that actually implicates Voss, the real ledger, the unencrypted transactions before they ran through the shell layer, exists somewhere. Our trace indicates it's archived inside Hale Capital's legacy document system, a partition that hasn't been accessed or updated in 18 months. The compliance archive, Vivian said immediately. Server room B, subpartition 7. I set it up. It's formatted as read-only to prevent tampering, but it saves a ghost record of every transaction that touches the main system, even the ones that get deleted from the primary drive. She paused. Her mind was moving now, fast and certain, the way it used to move when she was working and everything else fell away. If Gideon's real transactions touched any part of the main system, even the front-end relay, there'll be a record in that partition. Can you access it remotely? No. You need to be physically inside the server room. And you need my access code, which they'll have revoked by now. But the legacy partition runs on a separate authorization tree. They may not have thought to revoke that one. Nico stood, moved back to the window. Outside, the light was going bronze, the sun dropping behind the tree line. So the only clean evidence against Voss is inside a building that's currently locked down because of you, and you're the only person who can access it. Yes. And Voss knows the evidence exists, even if he doesn't know where, which is why you're still alive. He needs to know if you're a threat before he eliminates you. Also, yes. He turned from the window, looked at her with that flat assessment that she was starting to understand was not coldness, but concentration. The face of a man who cannot afford to feel things before he's finished calculating. We move at sundown, he said. We go to the second location, we stabilize, and by tomorrow morning we start building a plan to get inside that server room. He moved toward the door. Nico. He stopped. Those three people, Shen, Darce, Reeves, if I had pushed harder 18 months ago, if I hadn't accepted Gideon's review and moved on, she stopped, made herself finish it. They might still be alive. He turned to face her. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. He just looked at her with those dark eyes and said, maybe. Or maybe you'd be the fourth name on the list. He walked out. She sat with that until the shadows in the room went long and dark, and Renata appeared in the doorway with a go-bag and a jacket and the careful, practiced neutrality of a woman who had seen too many versions of this night. 15 minutes, Renata said. Vivian put on the jacket. She picked up the legal pad with Gideon's name on it and folded it into her pocket. Her hands had stopped shaking. She was in the back of the SUV, Nico at the wheel and Luca riding passenger, when the radio crackled. A voice she didn't recognize, tight and clipped. East Gate. 2 vehicles, armed. Luca's hand went to his weapon. Nico accelerated, and from somewhere behind them, deep inside the compound they'd just left, a sound like thunder that wasn't thunder, the hard percussive crack of an explosion splitting the night, a column of orange fire rising above the pine trees in the rearview mirror, and the radio filling suddenly with overlapping voices, all of them saying different things, none of them saying anything good. Vivian turned and looked through the rear window at the compound burning, at the place where she'd been sleeping 10 minutes ago. Nico's voice came quiet and absolute through the noise. They weren't here to watch. She faced forward. The road was dark ahead. The fire was still visible in the rearview mirror 20 minutes later. Nico drove without headlights for the first 8 miles, navigating by memory along a service road that ran parallel to the main highway through dense pine. Nobody spoke. The radio had gone silent 3 minutes after the explosion. Not dead, just switched off, because open channels were liabilities now, and everyone in that vehicle understood that. Luca had his weapon drawn, resting against his thigh, his eyes working the tree line on the passenger side with the mechanical patience of a man who had done this before. Many times. Vivian watched the orange glow shrink in the glass behind her and thought about the bed she'd slept in, the tray of soup Renata had brought, the legal pad with Gideon's name circled 3 times, all of it ash now, or close enough. Renata, she said. Nico's hands tightened on the wheel. She wasn't in the convoy, Vivian said. She was still inside when... She has a protocol, Luca said. He didn't turn around. Tunnel exit under the East Garden. She knows it better than anyone. She'll be fine. He said it with conviction. She couldn't tell if he believed it. The second location was 40 minutes further east, a converted industrial property behind a salvage yard. The kind of place that looks from the outside like it processes scrap metal, and from the inside like someone had quietly transformed it into something between a command center and a bunker. Reinforced walls, generator-backed power, a row of monitors along one wall showing feeds from 6 external cameras, no windows on the ground floor, 2 exits that Vivian could identify and probably more that she couldn't. There were already 4 people inside when they arrived. 2 men she didn't recognize, a woman with close-cropped hair and a headset, and Marco, who was standing at the monitor wall with his laptop open and an expression on his face that said the night had gotten longer since she'd last seen him. They hit the east gate first, Marco said before the door was fully closed behind them. Breaching charge military grade. Then a second device on the generator housing. Whoever planned this knew the layout. How? Nico said. That's what I've been pulling apart for the last 40 minutes. Marco turned from the monitors. His face was tight. Nico. There was a signal inside the compound, a transmitter, small, low frequency, designed to look like background interference from the security system. It was broadcasting our internal feed for... He stopped. For at least 3 days. The room went very still. 3 days, Nico repeated. Position data, personnel movements, room assignments. Marco paused. The woman's room. Her room specifically. There was a secondary transmitter in the nightstand lamp. They knew where she was, every hour, for the last 3 days. Vivian felt the back of her neck go cold. She thought about sitting cross-legged on that bed. The legal pad. The hours she'd spent at the window thinking she was somewhere safe. She'd been watched. Every movement, every room change, cataloged and transmitted to the people who wanted her dead. The lamp was in the room before I arrived, she said. Yes. Marco looked at her. The transmitter is new hardware, placed within the last week. So, someone on your staff, she started. No. Nico's voice cut across her, flat and absolute. Then, quieter. I don't know. That cost him something. She could see it, a hairline fracture in the composure, there and gone. Who had access to the compound in the last week? Luca asked. Outside the regular staff? Marco checked something on his laptop. Supply delivery on Tuesday. Regular contractor, been using him for 3 years. Medical equipment drop for Renata's supplies Wednesday morning. And he stopped reading. His jaw shifted. And a site inspection Thursday afternoon, requested by Dante. Structural assessment of the east wall. Everyone in the room looked at each other. Dante. The man who'd been in the argument with Nico that afternoon. The one who hadn't mentioned Voss's vehicles until morning. The one who'd authorized a third party onto the property 4 days ago. Where is Dante right now? Nico asked. Marco's answer was very quiet. He wasn't in the compound when it was hit. He left an hour before. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. Not the silence of people processing information. The silence of people absorbing a betrayal. Nico walked to the far wall, stood with his back to the room for 10 seconds. His shoulders didn't move. His hands were at his sides. When he turned around, his face had completed some internal transaction and come out the other side without any visible damage, which was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. Find him, he said to Luca. 3 words, and the temperature in the room dropped. Luca was already moving. Vivian sat in a chair near the monitor wall because her legs had decided they were done for the moment. The woman with the headset brought her a bottle of water without being asked. She drank half of it in one pull. How long has Dante been with you? She asked Marco. 7 years. And Voss got to him. Voss gets to everyone eventually. It's what he does. Marco's voice was clinical, but something burned underneath it. He finds the pressure point, the debt, the family member, the ambition, whatever the particular human is afraid of losing. Then he applies it slowly until the person bends. Dante has a daughter, the woman with the headset said. She said it to the floor, not to anyone in particular. Nobody responded to that. Vivian pressed the water bottle between her palms. The cold of it kept her focused. She was trying to hold a shape in her mind, the shape of what this meant for the plan, for the evidence inside Hale Capital's server room, for the increasingly narrow corridor between where they were now and any version of the future that didn't end with her name on a list alongside Peter Shen. Marco, she said, the compliance archive. If Voss has someone inside the compound, does he have someone inside Hale Capital's IT structure? Marco looked at her. Why? Because if he does, the archive might already be gone. The legacy partition is read-only, but it's not impenetrable. If someone with system-level access spent enough time on it, they could wipe it without leaving a standard deletion record. Marco turned back to his laptop. His fingers moved fast. 30 seconds passed. 40. I can't get a clean read from outside their firewall, he said. But the partition was still registering as active as of 6 hours ago. Whether it's still intact... He shook his head. I need inside access. Then we move fast, Vivian said. If they hit the compound tonight, it means something shifted. Something changed their timeline. She looked at Nico, who had come back to the center of the room and was listening with his arms crossed. What changed today? You, Nico said. Specifically, the forensic trace Marco ran this morning. We queried financial databases through 3 layers of proxy. But the query pattern itself, the structure of it, is recognizable to someone sophisticated enough to be watching for it. Voss saw someone digging toward the archive and assumed you were already accessing it, which means he thinks you already have something or you're close enough to something that he can't afford to wait. Nico uncrossed his arms. Which accelerates everything. Including us, she said. Including us. She stood up, her legs held. I need to get inside Hale Capital's building. The server room, physical access, 30 minutes maximum, and I can pull everything in the legacy partition onto an external drive before they know I was there. The building is locked down. Your credentials are... my legacy partition credentials are separate. I told you that. The building will have Voss's security people in addition to standard staff. Your face is on every monitor in that lobby. I know a way in that doesn't go through the lobby. Nico studied her. You've thought about this before. I've thought about everything I should have done differently for the last 18 hours. This is one of them. She set the water bottle on the console. There's a loading dock on the building's north side. It feeds directly to the freight elevator, which bypasses the main security desk. The dock access code is changed quarterly. Last cycle would have been 60 days ago, which means it hasn't rotated yet. I know what it is. They'll have cameras on the dock. Then your people handle the cameras. That's not my part. My part is the archive. She looked at him directly. I can do this, but we have to move before he wipes it. Something passed across Nico's face. Not doubt, exactly, but the thing that precedes a decision that can't be taken back. Tomorrow night, he said, we spend tonight building the approach. If the archive is still active by morning, we go. She nodded. She didn't sleep. She sat on a cot in a side room and reviewed everything she remembered about the building's internal layout, mentally walking the dock to the freight elevator to the sub-basement server corridor, counting security camera positions, timing the route. The woman with the headset, her name was Carla, Vivian learned at some point after midnight, brought coffee and sat nearby without speaking, which was more company than Vivian needed and less than she wanted. At 2 a.m, Luca came back. She heard him before she saw him. The particular weight of someone carrying something heavy that isn't luggage. He went directly to the room where Nico was working. The door didn't close all the way. She heard voices. Low. Then a long silence. Then Nico's voice, saying something she couldn't parse, in a tone she hadn't heard from him before. She went to the door frame. Dante was sitting in a chair in the center of the room. He was intact. No blood, nothing broken. But he had the appearance of a man who had been somewhere very dark inside himself and had not entirely come back. His hands were folded in his lap. His eyes were on the floor. Nico was standing 3 feet away, not looming, not performing, just present, in the particular way of someone who has decided to be very patient. I didn't know they'd blow the compound, Dante said. His voice was rough. I thought it was surveillance. I thought they wanted to know where she was. That was all. They used your access to plant a transmitter. I know. You knew what they'd do with the location. Dante's jaw moved. I thought, Gideon said he just wanted her brought in. No harm, he said. He said. Nico's voice had no inflection at all, and you believed him. He has my daughter. Dante finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying but from something worse. The sustained internal pressure of a man who has been living with a terrible thing. 6 weeks ago, a man showed up at her apartment, took photos, left them on her kitchen table. No note, no demand, just the photos. His hands tightened in his lap. Then Gideon called me himself. Said he just needed me to pass information occasionally. Said nobody would be hurt. Said Elena would be... He stopped. Where is she now? Vivian said. Both men looked at her. She hadn't realized she'd stepped fully into the room. I don't know, Dante said. He moved her 3 weeks ago. Said it was for her protection. Said once this was finished, she'd... His voice broke on the last word, and he swallowed it down hard. I know what I did. I know what it cost. I'm not I'm not asking for anything. The room was quiet. Vivian watched Nico's face and saw nothing she could read. His eyes were on Dante with that flat assessor's gaze, and whatever verdict was forming behind it stayed private. The transmitter you helped plant, Nico said. Where was the receiver feed going? A relay point. Carver operates it. Voss's security chief. Somewhere in the meatpacking corridor south of downtown, that's all I know. And Voss? Where is he operating from right now? He's not at his registered office. He has a secondary location, a private floor in the Alcott Tower, 44th floor. He's been running everything from there since the public story broke about the wife. Dante looked at Vivian when he said it. Didn't look away. I'm sorry, for what that's worth. She held his gaze for a moment. She didn't say anything. She wasn't in the business of offering absolution tonight. Nico turned from Dante and looked at Marco, who had appeared in the doorway behind Vivian. One look passed between them. The compressed communication of two people who have worked together long enough to speak without language. Marco nodded, took Dante by the arm, led him out. Nico moved to the table, spread out a building schematic that hadn't been there an hour ago. The Alcott Tower, 40 floors detailed in fine architectural print. His finger found the 44th floor. If Voss is there, he said, and we move on the Hale Capital server room tomorrow night. He'll know the moment someone enters the building, Vivian said. He'll have alerts on the legacy partition. The moment I start pulling files, he'll move. Nico looked at her. Which means we can't do one without doing both. She understood before he finished. Simultaneous. Your team hits the server room. My team hits Alcott Tower at the same moment. He can't respond to both. He paused. It's the only play that doesn't give him time to wipe the archive or disappear. Your team hits a building containing a man with private security, federal connections, and... She stopped, let out a breath. You said you'd declare war. I said that. I didn't think you meant... She looked at the schematic, at the 44th floor, at the weight of what was being arranged in this room in the middle of the night in an industrial bunker behind a salvage yard. I'm not asking you to protect me anymore. I'm asking you to go to war for me. That's different. Nico looked at her with those dark eyes that gave nothing away and said, It's the same thing. She was still sitting with that when Carla appeared at the room entrance, headset pushed to one side, her face doing something controlled and careful. She was looking at Nico. We have a problem, Carla said. What kind? Marco just ran a secondary trace on the compliance archive, deep packet analysis. She stopped. Her eyes moved to Vivian and then back to Nico, as if asking permission for something. Say it, Nico said. The archive isn't just intact. It's been accessed 40 minutes ago. Someone inside Hale Capital's IT system queried the legacy partition. Didn't pull files, didn't delete anything, just looked. Ran a directory sweep. Carla held a tablet up. On the screen, a log timestamp and a username. The access credentials that were used. She turned the tablet so Vivian could see. The username on the screen was hers. Her own credentials. The ones Damien had said were revoked. The ones that should have been dead since the night of the public accusation. But they weren't dead. Someone had kept them active. Someone had used them 38 minutes ago to look directly at the one piece of evidence that could destroy Gideon Voss. That wasn't me, Vivian said. I know, Carla said. You've been in this building all night. We have camera confirmation. Then who? The access point traces to an internal terminal inside Hale Capital. Carla lowered the tablet. Specifically, the executive floor, 47th level. She paused. Damien Hale's private office. The name landed in the room like a dropped weight. Vivian's mind went very still, not blank, still. The kind of stillness that precedes a massive rearrangement of everything. Damien, who had thrown her out into the storm, who had given his statement on the front steps with his tie straight and his voice steady, who had told the world she was a criminal and a liar and a woman who had betrayed every trust given to her. Damien was inside his own building in the middle of the night, accessing the archive with her credentials, looking at the same evidence she was trying to reach. He knows, Vivian said. He knows the archive exists. He knows what's in it. Or he suspects, Nico said, and he's trying to find out how bad it is before he decides which side he's on. She heard her own voice from somewhere slightly outside herself, flat and certain. He's been played the same as me. He's figuring out that Gideon set him up too, that he's not the powerful man pulling strings, he's another piece on the board, which makes him either an asset, Marco said from the doorway, or a liability. If Gideon finds out Damien is poking around that archive, Luca said, he'll deal with Damien the same way he dealt with Shen, Vivian finished, the same way he dealt with all of them. She stood up. Her pulse was high and even, like an engine running hot. Damien is in that building right now, alone, looking at evidence that proves the man he trusted has been running a criminal network through his company and murdering people who got too close. And Gideon's people are watching every credential query on that system. She looked at Nico. He's already been marked, she said. He just doesn't know it yet. Nico picked up his phone, dialed, let it ring twice, then said without preamble, "Get the vehicles ready. We move in 20 minutes." He hung up, looked at her. "You want to warn him?" It wasn't a question this time either. He had a habit of that, seeing through to the things she hadn't yet said. "He put me in the rain," she said. "He destroyed my life in front of cameras for a crowd. He let them drag me out barefoot." Her voice didn't shake. "But he didn't know. And if he dies tonight because he started asking the right questions too late..." She stopped, pressed her hand against her stomach, that old reflex. "I can't let that be the ending." Nico was watching her with that look that wasn't warmth and wasn't coldness and was something she didn't have a word for yet. Getting into that building tonight, unplanned, no preparation, with Voss's people potentially already converging? I know. It changes everything about tomorrow. We lose the element of, I know. She held his gaze. I know what I'm asking. He stood very still for 3 seconds. Then he put his jacket back on, the same deliberate motion as before, bottom button first, then the middle, and said, "Then we go get your husband. Before... The sentence never finished. Nico was already moving. The vehicles were a 2-car convoy this time, the armored Suburban and a second vehicle, a black panel van with darkened windows and enough equipment in the back to run a field operation. Luca drove the van. Marco rode with him, laptop open on his knees, fingers moving continuously. Carla stayed at the secondary location, managing the camera feeds. Vivian rode in the Suburban's passenger seat because Nico hadn't offered the back, and she hadn't asked. They hit the edge of downtown Harbor City at 3:47 in the morning. The streets were wet and nearly empty. A sanitation truck moved slowly along the far end of Merchant Avenue. A taxi idled outside a hotel 2 blocks north. Everything else was stillness and streetlight, and the particular quality of quiet that only exists in the hour before the city remembers it's alive. Nico killed the headlights 2 blocks from the Hale Capitol building and coasted to the curb. The Suburban's engine was nearly silent, another feature of the kind of vehicle that expects to be somewhere it isn't supposed to be. Loading dock camera is on a 90-second rotation. Marco's voice came through the earpiece. I can freeze the feed for 4 minutes max before the system flags the loop. After that, any guard paying attention will see a static image and know someone's in the system. We won't need 4 minutes for the dock, Vivian said. She looked at the building. 47 floors of glass and steel, most of it dark. A handful of floors still lit. Corporate cleaning crews, overnight operations, and somewhere on the 47th floor, one man sitting alone in his private office, looking at evidence that was going to reshape the last 3 years of his life. You've done building entries before, Nico said. It was not quite a question. I've done walkthroughs with building security to assess after-hours vulnerability. Part of compliance. She watched the dock entrance. No movement. I know where the blind spots are. He looked at her. The dashboard lights made his face all shadow and edge. You stay behind me until we're inside. You don't move without telling me. If anything changes, I know. Vivian, she turned. If Voss's people are already in that building, we don't fight our way out. We go to ground and we wait for Luca. You understand? Yes. Say it. I understand. He held her eyes for 1 more second, then he opened the door. The dock entrance was a steel roll-up gate, locked with a keypad and a secondary deadbolt. Vivian punched the 6-digit code from memory. The code she'd set herself 2 years ago during a security audit she'd run without telling anyone in management because she'd learned early that telling management meant Gideon heard about it first. The gate rolled up with a sound like distant thunder. Nico was through the gap before it was fully open, moving low and fast, and she followed him into the dark. The freight elevator was exactly where she remembered. She hit the call button. While they waited, Nico stood with his back to the wall and his weapon in a low-ready position. Watching the dock's far end with the particular quality of stillness she'd come to understand meant he was running calculations. Sight lines, distances, time. The elevator came. They got in. She hit B2 for the server sub-basement. "Marco," Nico said quietly, "47th floor shows 1 active keycard. Registered to Damien Hale. No other active cards above the 32nd floor." A pause. "Also, I'm picking up a second network signal originating from somewhere in the building. Not the building's standard Wi-Fi, a separate encrypted broadcast. Someone else is running equipment in there." Nico and Vivian looked at each other. "How long has it been active?" she asked. "At least 2 hours. Maybe more. I only just isolated it." Marco's voice was careful. "It's the same signal architecture as the transmitter we found in the compound. Carver's signature." The elevator stopped at B2. The doors opened onto a corridor she recognized. Gray concrete, fluorescent strip lighting, the low electronic hum of server hardware. She moved fast, Nico a step behind, through 2 sets of security doors that her legacy credentials still opened, into the server room proper. Rows of black towers, blinking indicator lights, the cold, climate-controlled air that always made her think of hospitals. Sub-partition 7 was in the back row. She found the terminal, a standalone workstation that predated the building's main network upgrade, still running the original OS she'd spec'd out during the compliance renovation. She sat down, logged in with a username and password that she'd never shared with anyone and that lived in no digital record she'd created, only in her memory. The system accepted it. "I'm in," she said. Behind her, Nico had positioned himself facing the door. She could hear his breathing. Slow, controlled, a man managing his own physiology the way a pilot manages instruments. She pulled up the partition directory. It was intact. Every record. 18 months of ghost transactions, every payment that had moved through the relay system, every deleted transfer that the standard drive had tried to erase, and this one had quietly preserved. She inserted the drive Marco had given her. Small, matte, black, the size of a thumb, and started the transfer. 43 gigabytes. Estimated time, 11 minutes. "Marco," she said. "Transfer started." "Confirmed. I'm watching the network traffic. You're pulling clean so far, but..." His voice changed. "The encrypted signal just repositioned. It's moving. Something in the building is mobile." "Someone is carrying it," Nico said. "Yes." "Location?" "Can't triangulate precisely. Somewhere between the 20th and 30th floor, moving upward." Nico spoke without turning around. "Vivian, how long?" 10 minutes, maybe 9. His jaw tightened. She could see it in profile. He pressed the earpiece. "Luca, we have a mobile unit in the building, possibly Carver's team. Position the van on the north exit and be ready to move." Luca's voice clipped. "Copy." 8 minutes passed. She watched the transfer bar with a focus so acute it had burned away everything else. The fear, the exhaustion, the low, persistent ache in her abdomen, the image of the compound burning in the rearview mirror. Just the bar. Just the numbers counting down. 7% remaining when Nico said, "Someone's in the elevator." She heard it. The subtle machinery of the freight elevator engaging somewhere above them, beginning its descent. "How long?" he said. 2 minutes. Maybe less. "The elevator, is there another way out of this level?" "Fire stairwell, other end of the corridor past the HVAC room." "Transfer speed." "I can't make it go faster." "I know, I'm asking how long." 90 seconds, if nothing interrupts the connection. The elevator was still descending. She could hear it through the concrete. Nico moved to the server room door, not closing it, because the lock would slow them down on exit, but positioning himself beside it, flat against the wall, weapon up. 60 seconds. The elevator stopped. Basement level. The doors open. Footsteps. More than one person. Moving toward the server corridor with the kind of unhurried confidence that meant they knew exactly where they were going. 40 seconds. Vivian, Nico said. I know. The first security door at the corridor entrance beeped. Someone had an access card. A real one, not spoofed. One of Voss's people with legitimate building credentials. That meant they'd been inside the corporate structure even deeper than Voss's direct network. 20 seconds. The second security door beeped. Done, she said. She yanked the drive, stood, and the server room door swung open, and a man came through it with a weapon raised, and Nico moved so fast she didn't track it. Just heard the impact, the controlled violence of it, the specific sound of a weapon being redirected before it fired. And then a second man came through the door, and there was a shot. Suppressed, a hollow thump that punched a hole in the server casing 6 inches from her left shoulder, and she was already moving, around the end of the row, down toward the back wall. She heard Nico. Not his voice, just the sounds of him. The physical language of a fight happening very fast in a very small space. A grunt of impact, something metal hitting concrete, another suppressed shot that didn't hit anything she could identify. Then silence. She stayed at the back wall with the drive pressed in her fist and her breathing too loud in her own ears. 5 seconds. 10. Clear. Nico's voice, rough at the edges. She came around the row. 2 men on the floor, one unconscious, one not moving in a different way. Nico was standing with his weapon at his side and his left hand pressed against his right forearm, where a dark stain was spreading through the black fabric of his sleeve. You're shot, she said, grazed. He picked up one of their weapons with his uninjured arm, checked the clip, pocketed it. Can you walk fast? Yes. Then we go now. They went through the security doors and into the corridor and to the stairwell door and up. Not the freight elevator, not anymore. Up 4 flights to the ground level, through a maintenance exit that opened to an alley on the building's north side, and the van was already there, Luca at the wheel, door open, Marco reaching out to pull her inside. She got in. Nico got in. Luca drove. She was shaking. Full body, no controlling it. The kind of shaking that happens after the fact when the body finally presents the bill for everything it borrowed. She pressed the drive against her sternum and breathed. I have it, she said. To Marco, to the van, to no one specific. Marco took the drive. His hands moved over the laptop. A pause. Then, it's intact. All of it. Another pause. Vivian, this is everything. Transaction records, communication metadata, account structures, timestamps dating back 26 months. This is enough to us. I know what it's enough for, she said. Nico's arm. She pulled off her outer shirt, the plain cotton one Renata had given her, that felt like it was from another lifetime, and pressed it against the wound. He let her. He sat with his forearm extended and his eyes looking forward and his jaw set with the same controlled stillness as everything else. It's not deep, he said. Stop talking. Stop talking and let me work. He stopped talking. She worked. The wound was a graze, deep enough to bleed seriously, not deep enough to be immediately dangerous. She applied pressure and held it. His arm was very warm under her hands, and she was aware of the proximity and the way you become aware of things in the aftermath of adrenaline, with a clarity that has nothing soft about it. The encrypted signal in the building, Marco said. He was watching his screen. It went active again, moving upward. They were never just coming for the server room. They were going for Damien, Vivian said. The signal is on the 46th floor now, one below his office. She looked at Nico. He looked at her. We go up, she said. We have what we came for. He's up there alone. He put you in the rain, Vivian. I know what he did. She was still holding his arm. The pressure was steady. I know exactly what he did, and I know he's a man who has spent 3 years living with the wrong person at the center of his trust, and tonight he figured out who that person actually was, and Gideon is about to make sure he never says a word about it. She held Nico's gaze. I'm not going up there for what he was to me. I'm going up there for what he knows. A beat, 2. Luca, Nico said, swing north. We go in through the executive entrance. I need the access code for the 47th floor elevator lobby. Luca already had his phone out. Vivian kept pressure on the wound. The van turned. Through the darkened window, Harbor City moved past in fragments of light and wet pavement, and somewhere in the 47th floor of a glass tower, Damien Hale sat in his office with the weight of what he'd found pressing down on everything he'd ever built. The executive entrance was a glass and steel alcove on the building's east face, a private entry for board-level personnel with a separate elevator that went directly to the upper floors without passing the main lobby. Luca had the key code from a contact she didn't ask about. The door opened. The elevator was different from the freight. Marble floor, brass fittings, the quiet luxury of a firm that had spent decades projecting confidence. She stood in it with Nico beside her, his arm freshly wrapped with a strip of fabric from the van's emergency kit, his face still doing nothing in particular. "Marco," Nico said. "Signal position. 47th floor. It's stationary. Has been for 90 seconds. The elevator doors opened. The 47th floor at 4 in the morning was all shadow and city light. The kind of ambiance that costs money. Glass-walled offices. A reception desk with a single lamp. The central corridor running the length of the floor, and at its far end, behind a set of frosted glass doors marked Executive Suite, a light was on. They moved down the corridor. She was aware of her own footsteps on the carpet, the sound of Nico a half step behind. The city spread out through the floor-to-ceiling windows on either side. Harbor City at its most cinematic, all dark water and lit bridges, and the kind of skyline that makes people feel their lives are significant. She didn't feel that. She felt like a woman who had been awake for 22 hours with blood on her hands from another person's wound and a stolen hard drive in her pocket. The frosted doors were ajar. She pushed through. The executive suite was large. A conference table to the left, a seating area to the right, and at the far end, behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars, Damien Hale. He was in the same clothes she'd last seen him in, the ones he'd worn to the front steps, the ones she'd watched on a phone screen as he destroyed her. His tie was off. His jacket was over the back of the chair. He looked like a man who had sat down 3 hours ago and lost the ability to stand back up. He looked up when she came in. Whatever expression he'd been wearing collapsed into something she'd never seen on his face. Not guilt, exactly. Closer to the particular devastation of a man looking at the precise shape of the hole he has dug. "Vivian," he said. His voice was wrecked. "Where's your phone?" she said. He blinked. "Your phone, Damien, where is it?" On the desk." "Give it to me." She crossed to the desk. He handed her the phone without argument. She checked it. Active, no calls in progress, but a text thread open. Messages from a number saved as G.V. Gideon. The last message, sent 40 minutes ago, read, "Stay there. I'm sending someone up to help you understand what you found." Nico read it over her shoulder. His hand came down on the desk beside hers. "Marco, the signal on 47. Where exactly?" A pause that lasted 3 full seconds. "Vivian," Marco's voice said, with a quality she hadn't heard from him before. "It's not in the office. It's in the elevator lobby. The main one. East side." Another pause. It just went active again, moving, toward the executive suite. Damien was on his feet now. "What?" "Move," Nico said. He didn't say it loud. He said it with a velocity that communicated everything noise would have slowed down, and all 3 of them moved, away from the desk, toward the far end of the suite, through a second door that opened into a private boardroom. Nico eased the door almost closed. Through the gap, she watched the frosted glass of the executive suite entrance. A figure came through. One man, large, moving the way trained people move. Unhurried but precise, taking in the room in sections, noting the empty desk chair, the coat still on its back, the light still on. He stopped in the center of the room, reached for his earpiece, said, "He's not here." A pause. He listened, then turned slowly, scanning the room. His eyes stopped on the boardroom door. Vivian stopped breathing. Beside her, she could feel Nico, completely still, weapon in hand, making no sound at all. On her other side, Damien, whose breathing was audible and ragged, and she pressed her elbow against his arm, hard, and felt him swallow the next breath. The man in the executive suite took 3 steps toward the boardroom door, stopped. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted. Some information arriving that changed the calculation. He said, into his earpiece, "Copy, moving to extraction," and walked back out through the frosted glass. Nobody moved for 15 seconds. Nico moved first. He pushed the boardroom door open, crossed to the executive suite entrance, looked into the corridor. Clear. He got pulled, he said. Something redirected him. "What?" Vivian asked. Marco's voice in the earpiece, and this time the quality in it was different again. Something urgent underneath the control. "Nico, federal vehicles, 4 of them, moving up Merchant Avenue toward the Hale Capitol building. Lights, no sirens. This is a coordinated approach." A pause. Someone called the feds. Vivian looked at Damien. Damien was holding his phone. The screen was facing her. She could see a sent message on an outgoing thread. A number she didn't recognize, sent 20 minutes ago. A message that read, "Hale Capitol building, 47th floor. Evidence of fraud, murder, and conspiracy implicating Gideon Voss. Come now. I'll be here." "You called them," she said. Damien looked at her with those wrecked eyes. "I found the archive. I saw the ledger. I saw Shen's name. I saw—" He stopped. His hand dropped to his side. "I saw everything, Vivian. I saw what he built inside my company. I saw what he used your name to do. I saw—" His voice cracked down the middle. "I saw what I let happen because I was too proud to ask the right questions." She held his gaze for a long moment. The city was spread out behind him through the glass. Harbor City at 4 in the morning, the same city that had watched his statement on the front steps and believed every word. And now the federal vehicles were coming up Merchant Avenue, and Gideon Voss was somewhere in the Alcott Tower realizing the walls were beginning to move. "The drive," Nico said. He looked at Vivian. "We can't hand it to the feds ourselves, not with my prints on the building's security footage." "I know." She looked at Damien. "Can you walk into a federal interview with what you found in the archive?" "Yes." "Can you hand them a drive containing everything in the legacy partition without telling them how it was obtained?" Damien looked at the drive in her hand, then at her face. "Yes." She held it out. He took it. His fingers closed around it carefully, the way you hold something you understand the weight of. "The Alcott Tower," Nico said quietly, to her, not to Damien. 44th floor, Voss. She looked at him. "The feds will move on Hale Capitol. They'll trace the evidence to Voss, but corporate fraud investigations take months. Murder cases take longer. Voss has contingencies, offshore accounts, extraction routes. By the time a warrant clears for the Alcott Tower." "He'll be gone," she said. "Yes." She understood what he wasn't saying, what he was offering, what it would cost. Damien was watching the two of them. Something moved across his face. The particular expression of a man understanding that he is in a room with forces he has no framework for, and that the woman he married has been navigating those forces for the past 24 hours without breaking. "Nico," Luca's voice in the earpiece, "federal units are at the building entrance. You have 3 minutes before they secure the perimeter. Maybe less." Nico looked at Vivian. One last check. The question without the words. She gave him the answer the same way. Then she turned to Damien. "When they ask where the drive came from, tell them you found it in the legacy partition using my credentials, which you accessed because you suspected the evidence against me had been planted. That's true. All of it is true." "Vivian, don't," she said. Not harshly, just clean. "Not tonight. There's no version of tonight where we talk about the rest of it." He nodded. He looked like a man accepting a sentence. She turned and walked toward the executive suite entrance where Nico was already moving and the corridor was still clear, and the elevator at the far end was still open, waiting, as if it had known all along they'd need to. The elevator was still open, waiting, as if it had known all along they'd need to leave fast. They went down in silence. Nico, Vivian, Luca, who had come up to meet them, all 3 pressed into the brass-fitted box with the city sliding past the exterior glass. Nico's arm had bled through the fabric wrap. She could see the dark stain spreading at his forearm in the reflection of the elevator doors. He hadn't mentioned it since the server room. He wouldn't mention it now. The executive entrance was still clear. The federal vehicles had staged at the main lobby on the building's south face, standard approach by the book, giving the building occupant time to respond. It would buy them 4 minutes, maybe 5. They were through the north alley and in the van in 3. Luca drove without headlights for 2 blocks, then turned east on a service road that ran behind the commercial strip parallel to Merchant Avenue. In the side mirror, Vivian watched the blue and white lights of the federal units pulse against the glass face of the Hale Capitol building, steady and cold, like a heartbeat the city didn't know it had. "Alcott Tower," Nico said. Luca didn't respond, just drove. Marco was in the back with his laptop and the particular focused silence of a man running 17 things simultaneously. "Voss's signal went dark 11 minutes ago," he said. "Either he killed the transmitter or he's moved to a shielded environment." "The 44th floor," Nico said. "Is it shielded?" "Parts of it. The inner conference rooms are rated against electronic surveillance, standard for a man in his position." Marco paused. "If he's gone to ground in there, we won't know what's happening until we're inside." "How many people does he keep on that floor?" "Variable. Carver manages a rotation. Minimum 4 at all times, more when threat levels are elevated." Another pause. "After tonight, threat levels are elevated." Vivian was looking out the window, the city passing, wet streets, empty intersections, a newspaper box on the corner of 5th and Alcott, with a headline she couldn't read at this speed but recognized from the photo, her own face, the one they'd used from a charity gala 2 years ago, the one where she was smiling at something off camera and looked like a woman who had no idea what was coming. She supposed she hadn't. "He'll run," she said. "If he's been watching the signals all night, the server room breach, the federal vehicles at Hale Capitol, he knows the evidence survived. He knows the timeline collapsed." She turned from the window. "He won't fight. He'll extract." "Extraction routes from the Alcott Tower," Nico said to Marco. "Rooftop helipad. Private. Registered to a shell company that traces 3 layers deep to a Voss subsidiary." Marco's voice was steady. "If he has a pilot on standby, how long to reach the helipad from the 44th floor? Service elevator to the roof is express. 4 minutes, maybe 3. Nico looked at the clock on the dash, then at the distance remaining to the Alcott Tower. Visible now, 4 blocks ahead, a building that looked like money and power condensed into glass and steel, the kind of structure that makes people feel small from the street. "We go straight to the roof," he said. "Nico," Luca said. One word, a question and a warning compressed together. "I know. If the helipad is active, if the pilot, I know what I'm walking into." The van stopped 1 block from the Alcott Tower's service entrance. Nico looked at Vivian. "You stay." "No. This part isn't—" "Gideon Voss has never seen you." She held his gaze. "He's never met you. He has no face for you. But he knows mine. If he sees me coming, he'll know everything he spent a year building just came apart. And sometimes the thing that breaks a man is not the threat itself, but the proof that his work failed." She paused. "I want him to see my face." Something moved in Nico's eyes. Not disagreement. Something more complicated. "You understand what the roof means. If it gets dangerous. I've been in danger since the moment they dragged me out of my own house." He looked at her for 1 more second. Then he got out of the van. The Alcott Tower's service entrance used a keycard system that Marco overrode remotely in 40 seconds. The service elevator was waiting. They went up, Nico, Vivian, and 2 men she'd only registered as presences until now, both of them moving with the compact efficiency of people for whom this was not the first time. 43 floors. 44. The elevator continued past, express to the roof. The doors opened onto wind. The rooftop of the Alcott Tower at 4:30 in the morning was a flat expanse of composite material, ventilation housings, antenna arrays, and at the far end, the helipad. A circle of yellow runway lights that were active, glowing, ready. The helicopter was already there, a private model, Engine running at low idle, the rotors moving in that preparatory way that means departure is minutes away. And standing at the edge of the helipad, in conversation with the pilot, a man in a charcoal overcoat with a carry bag over his shoulder, and the posture of someone who has spent his entire adult life acting like rooms belong to him. Gideon Voss. He heard them before he saw them, turned, took in Nico first, the unfamiliar face, the weapon at low ready, the two men flanking, and his expression did something quick and calculating. Then his eyes moved and found Vivian, and the calculation stopped. Just for a moment. Just long enough for something raw to surface before he put it back. Vivian, he said. He made her name sound like an inconvenience. She walked across the rooftop. The wind up here was sharp, carrying the smell of rain and aviation fuel and the city far below. She stopped 15 feet from him, close enough for him to see her face clearly. She wanted him to see it. The pilot's been paid, Nico said from behind her. He's not a problem. She heard movement, the pilot stepping away from the helicopter, hands visible, making the particular body language of a hired professional who has decided that whatever he was paid is not enough for whatever this is. Gideon watched the pilot go. Then he looked back at Vivian. His face had rearranged itself into something composed. He was good at that. She'd watched him do it at dinner tables and board meetings. The instant, seamless transition from whatever he actually was to whatever the room needed him to be. A skill. A terrible one. The archive, he said. Yes. Federal custody. By now, yes. He nodded slowly. Set the carry bag down. Not surrender. Assessment. 26 months of transactions. I assume the routing structure is visible enough that a competent analyst can follow it. I built the archive, she said. I know exactly what's visible. Yes, I suppose you do. He looked at her with something that might, in a different man, have been respect. You were supposed to be the clean variable, the one element of the equation that would absorb the liability without understanding it. He tilted his head slightly. You were supposed to be easier than this. I was supposed to be a lot of things, she said. A dutiful wife, a quiet executive, a woman who finds discrepancies and accepts the explanation she's given. She took one step forward. The wind moved her hair. I was easy for a long time, Gideon. That was my mistake, not yours. You cost me a great deal. Peter Shen cost you nothing. Sylvia Darce cost you nothing. You took everything from them and kept building. Her voice stayed level. She'd decided somewhere between the server room and this rooftop what this conversation was and what it wasn't. It wasn't rage. Rage was for people who needed the other person to understand what they'd done. She didn't need that from Gideon Voss. There are federal analysts going through 26 months of your financial architecture right now. There are 3 homicide cases that are about to be reopened. There are offshore accounts that are already flagged. She paused. You have nowhere to go. I have excellent lawyers. You had excellent lawyers. They're part of the architecture. When the architecture falls, they fall with it. She watched him. The helicopter doesn't save you. There's no extraction route out of a federal evidence package this size. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. The rooftop wind moved between them. Behind him, the helipad lights glowed steady yellow, and the helicopter sat idle, going nowhere. What is it you want from me? He said. A confession? An apology? I want you to stand here on this roof and understand that the woman you chose as your clean variable is the reason your entire operation is gone. She said it quietly. Not performance, just fact. I want you to know that before the handcuffs go on. Something moved in Gideon's face. Not remorse. Gideon Voss did not do remorse. But something. The particular expression of a man who has run a masterwork of engineering and watched it fail at the variable he underestimated. She could see him processing it, filing it, even now categorizing. You're pregnant, he said. He'd noticed. He noticed everything. Damien's child. My child, she said. He picked up the carry bag, held it at his side, made no move to run. There was nowhere to run to, and he was not the kind of man who ran visibly. You'll testify. Every word. He nodded once. Then he looked past her at Nico and for the first time addressed him directly. You've made a significant enemy of a significant number of people tonight. I've had worse weeks, Nico said. Gideon almost smiled, the expression of one powerful man acknowledging another across an unbridgeable difference. Then he set the bag down, reached into his coat pocket, and produced his phone. Set it on top of the bag, hands visible. I'd prefer to call my attorney before the federal agents arrive, he said. I assume they're on their way. They are, Nico said. Then I'll wait. He sat down on the carry bag. Right there on the rooftop, in his charcoal overcoat with the helicopter behind him and the city spread out below, and he took out a business card, his attorney's number, presumably, written on the back, and waited with the patience of a man who has spent his life being very good at waiting. Vivian looked at him for one more moment, then she turned around. Nico was watching her, not checking on her, watching her, the way he'd been watching her since the first night, with that flat assessment that she now understood was not indifference, but its precise opposite. A man who looks at things he intends to understand. She walked back to him, stopped. The wind moved between them. It's done, she said. He looked at her. Almost. She understood. Not done until the federal vehicles arrived. Not done until the cuffs went on and the helicopter stayed grounded and Gideon Voss became a case number instead of a threat. Not done until the evidence hit a desk and a prosecutor read it and someone with authority said the words that would start the long, grinding process of her life becoming hers again. "How's your arm?" she said. "Functional?" "That's not what I asked." He looked down at it. The wrap had held. The bleeding had slowed. "It'll need proper attention." "Yes, it will." They stood there on the rooftop with the city below them and Gideon Voss behind them and the first gray suggestion of dawn beginning at the eastern edge of the sky, barely visible, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything yet. The federal vehicles arrived 17 minutes later. She counted the lights from the rooftop. 4 units initially, then 2 more, and the sound of rotor blades from the east. A federal helicopter coming in to secure the helipad. Nico and his people were gone before the first federal agent reached the roof access door. She stayed. She'd told him she would stay, and he hadn't argued because he understood that this part, the standing still, the facing it, was hers to do. The agents came through the roof door with their weapons drawn and their voices sharp. She raised her hands, said her name, said it clearly, without qualification. It took 45 minutes for the lead federal agent, a woman named Brandt, with close-cropped red hair and the kind of tiredness that comes from having been awake since yesterday, to understand the full shape of what she was looking at. A suspect, a witness, a victim, all the same person, all on the same rooftop. Gideon Voss was placed in custody without incident. He made one call to his attorney while sitting on his carry bag and then stood and extended his wrists with the same composed propriety he'd brought to every room he'd ever walked into. The handcuffs clicked. He looked at Vivian once more across the rooftop as they walked him toward the door, and his expression said nothing at all. She watched him go. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. They were paper. Depositions and affidavits and conference rooms with federal attorneys and boxes of documented evidence that had to be cross-referenced and verified and challenged and re-verified. She sat in those rooms for hours at a time with a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink and a legal pad covered in her own handwriting and Brandt across the table asking the same questions 17 different ways to make sure the answers held. They held. The forensic accounting team confirmed the archive's integrity within 2 weeks. The routing structure Marco had identified was mapped and verified. Shell company registrations were subpoenaed. Bank records from 4 countries arrived in tranches. And with each tranche, the architecture that Gideon Voss had spent 26 months constructing came apart with the particular inevitability of a thing that was always going to fall. It just needed someone willing to pull the first thread. Peter Shen's death was reclassified as homicide by the end of the 3rd week. Sylvia Darce's case was reopened. The investigation into the disappearance of the analyst named Reeves expanded to 2 additional states. Carver, Voss's security chief, was arrested at a cargo facility in New Jersey trying to cross to a private airstrip. He negotiated a cooperation agreement within 48 hours. His testimony filled in the operational details that the financial records couldn't. Dante's daughter, Elena, was located at a private residence in Connecticut, physically unharmed, having been kept under a kind of informal house arrest that her captor had called protective custody. She was 23 years old, and she held her father's hand in the parking lot of the federal building for a long time, without either of them saying anything. Vivian didn't watch that reunion. She heard about it from Luca, who told her in the flat, factual way he told her most things, and she sat with it for an afternoon and thought about what it costs a person to be someone else's pressure point and what it costs to be the person who applied the pressure. The charges against her were formally dismissed on a Tuesday morning in early November. No ceremony. A document, a signature, a call from her attorney. She was sitting in the apartment Nico had arranged for her, a safe, anonymous place on the west side with 2 locks on every door and a view of nothing more remarkable than a parking structure, when the call came. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while after. The window was gray with November light. The parking structure outside had a pigeon on its ledge, and the pigeon was doing nothing in particular, just standing there. She pressed both palms flat against her stomach. 19 weeks now. She'd seen the ultrasound, right? The shape of a person, the movement, the heartbeat rendered in sound. A girl. She'd known before the technician said it, the way you know things sometimes without being able to explain the knowing. Damien came to the apartment once. She hadn't invited him, but she'd left the address with his attorney because there were things that needed to be said in person rather than through intermediaries. He stood in the doorway looking like a man who had been through a fire that hadn't burned him visibly but had changed the composition of everything underneath. "She'll know who I am," he said. He meant the baby. "Yes." "What will you tell her?" Vivian looked at him, really looked, at the man she'd married, at the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, at the way his hands hung at his sides with nothing to hold. "I'll tell her the truth. That her father made serious mistakes and lived with them and tried to do the right thing when it was almost too late." She paused. "That's the most honest version." His jaw moved. "And the other part, what he did to you, what he let happen." "She can ask me when she's old enough to understand the answer." He nodded. He looked at the floor, then he looked up. "The company. The restructuring. The board has agreed to full restitution. The families of Shen, Darce, and Reeves. The employees who were affected by the fraud. I've engaged an independent ethics board to oversee operations going forward." He said it without performance. "Just information. It won't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "It won't." He looked at her one more time. There was something in his face that wanted to be more than what it was, that wanted to stretch into something she'd take back. Some version of the 3 years where he'd been different, where he'd asked the right questions, where he'd believed the right person. She could see him wanting it. She didn't help him. "Thank you," he said, "for warning me. On the 47th floor. You didn't have to." "I know," she said. He left. She didn't see him again for a long time. Gideon Voss entered a plea of not guilty on 17 counts. The trial date was set for the following spring. His attorneys were excellent and expensive, and they did what excellent, expensive attorneys do, which was buy time and file motions and challenge evidence chains and construct alternative narratives with impressive geometric precision. None of it would be enough. Brandt had told her that quietly in the hallway of the federal building after the indictment. Not a promise, a read. The read of someone who had spent 15 years watching these architectures collapse under their own documented weight. Vivian believed her. The seaside property was Nico's. He offered it in October, when she'd been in the West Side apartment for 6 weeks, and the walls had started to feel like a waiting room. He offered it the way he offered most things, directly, without framing, as a fact she could accept or decline. "It's outside the city," he said, "about an hour north. Private access. Good medical facility 20 minutes away." "You want me out of the city?" "I want you somewhere quiet for the last months." He looked at her abdomen. It was showing now, unmistakably. "And somewhere with a good medical facility 20 minutes away." She accepted. The property sat on a bluff above a gray November ocean, a house that had been built for endurance rather than beauty. Stone and timber, wide windows, a wraparound porch from which you could watch the water move in its perpetual indifferent way. She moved in with 2 bags and the legal pad she'd been carrying since the night of the compound, now filled on every page. Nico came on weekends. Not always. Sometimes his world required him elsewhere, and she understood that his world was what it was and would remain what it was, and she had made her peace with that ambiguity in the way you make peace with ambiguous things, which is not by resolving them, but by learning to exist alongside them. He came on weekends when he could, and when he came, he brought food and sat with her in the evenings on the porch, with coffee, watching the water, and sometimes they talked and sometimes they didn't. She learned things about him in those evenings. Slowly, the way you learn things about people who guard themselves, not through direct disclosure, but through the accumulation of small details. He'd grown up in a city not unlike Harbor City, the kind of place where the water is close and the winters are long, and the structures that govern people's lives are not always the ones written into law. His father had been a dock worker. His mother had left when he was 11. He had a younger sister somewhere in Europe who he called once a month and whose children he sent things to without meeting them. "Why haven't you met them?" she asked, one evening in late November when the ocean was all wind and dark. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Because the life I live is not something you import into a child's world." "But you brought me here." "You're not a child." "I have a child." He looked at her. "That's different." She thought about that for a while. The ocean kept moving. The porch light drew moths despite the cold because moths don't adjust their behavior based on seasonal reasoning. "You could change," she said. "What you do. The life." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I've been thinking about what comes after, for the first time in a long time." He said it plainly, without drama. "That's new." She held that. The way she'd learned to hold things he gave her, carefully, without pressing, because pressed things in his hands tended to close. The girl was born on a Wednesday in late January. The medical facility 20 minutes away had a maternity ward that smelled like every maternity ward in the world, antiseptic and cafeteria food, and the particular ambient anxiety of people in threshold moments. The labor was 16 hours. Renata was there, Renata, who had made it out through the tunnel the night of the compound, who had appeared at the seaside property in December with a bag of equipment and a manner that said she'd be staying until further notice and was not interested in discussing it. Nico arrived at hour 9. He came in without ceremony, sat in the chair by the window, and stayed. She didn't ask him to. He didn't explain. The girl arrived at 4:52 in the morning, screaming. Vivian held her and felt the full weight of everything the last 4 months had cost and built and broken and rebuilt, and it didn't resolve into anything clean or certain. It just was. The girl was warm and loud and perfect in the way of all new things that don't yet know what the world is capable of. "She needs a name," Renata said. "I know." "Have you decided?" She looked at the girl, at the face that was still sorting itself out, becoming. "Nora," she said. It had come to her sometime in December, on the porch, watching the water. She hadn't told anyone. "Her name is Nora." Nico was looking at the girl from across the room. He had the expression of a man who has lived his entire life in the vocabulary of threat and force and the particular mathematics of power, and who is encountering something for which he has no language and is deciding whether that absence is a loss or an arrival. She looked at him over the girl's head. He met her eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The trial of Gideon Voss began on a Monday in April, under a sky the color of slate, with news cameras on the courthouse steps and a crowd that was smaller than it would have been if the story hadn't spent 3 months competing with other catastrophes for space on people's screens. Vivian testified on the 4th day. She sat in the witness box in a blue dress she'd bought for the occasion and answered every question with the precision of someone who has been deposing herself in her own mind for months and knows exactly where every fact lives. Gideon sat at the defense table and looked at her for the duration of her testimony without looking away. She looked back. She had decided to look back. Every time his eyes found hers, she held it, not with defiance, not with hatred, just with the level, undecorated attention of a woman who has nothing left to hide from him. He was convicted on 14 of 17 counts. The sentence would come later. Brandt called her that evening with the verdict, and she thanked her and sat by the window of the seaside house watching Nora sleep in the bassinet by the wall, the rise and fall of the girl's breathing the most regular and reliable thing in the room. She picked up the legal pad, the one she'd been carrying. She turned to the last written page. Gideon's name, circled 3 times, the word "Y" written underneath. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the pad. She didn't throw it away. She put it on the shelf beside the window. Evidence, maybe. Or just the record of a woman who had needed to write things down in order to understand them, and who had eventually understood them. Nico called that night. She told him the verdict. He said nothing for a moment, and in the silence she could hear something distant on his end. Wind or water, the particular acoustics of being somewhere large and open. "It's done," he said. "Most of it. The rest takes time." "Yes," she said. "It does." Outside the window, the ocean was audible even from here, a sound that had no agenda, that had been making the same sound against the same bluff for longer than any of them would be alive to listen to it. Nora made a small sound in her sleep, not distress, just the language of a person adjusting to existence. Vivian leaned her head back against the chair. The house was quiet. The legal pad was on the shelf. The drive that had burned through a server room and a rooftop confrontation and 4 months of federal proceedings was now Exhibit 47 in a criminal case that would eventually result in the longest sentencing in the history of Harbor City's financial district. She thought about the highway, the rain, the gravel under her hands and knees and the headlights that swept across her, and the door that opened and the voice that said, "You're bleeding." She thought about what it means to be seen at your lowest by someone who has no obligation to look, and what that does to a person, and whether gratitude is the right word for it, or whether there is no right word, and you simply carry it. She was still thinking about it when sleep came, quiet and unhurried, the way it comes to people who have finally put down something very heavy and can't yet believe the weight is gone. The ocean kept going. Nora kept breathing. And outside, above the bluff, the sky over the water began to do the thing it does every morning. The slow, uncommitted lightning that means nothing and everything at once, that has no memory of the night before, that arrives the same way regardless of what happened in the dark. Just the light. Just the sea. Just a woman in a chair by a window, with her daughter sleeping 3 feet away, and her whole life, for the first time in longer than she could properly remember, belonging entirely to herself.